bottom line is when you run into someone with a big ego, what you have to do and the way that you handle it is you have to subordinate your own ego. You have to actually subordinate your own ego. And right there, when I just said that, if you're listening to this right now and you heard me say, well, if you run into someone with a big ego, what you need to do is put your own ego in check and subordinate your own ego. If that made your cackles stand up and you're like, what is he talking about? That's exactly what I'm talking about. You see, the problem isn't that other person's ego. The problem is actually your ego. And I feel this, even though I sit around and say, humility is the most important thing and you got to keep your ego in check. When I run into someone with a big ego, I'll feel that start to flare up like, oh, who does this person think they are? And as soon as I feel that, I'm like, oh, there's my ego right there. And I subordinate my own ego. What does that mean? You come in and say, I've been doing this for a long time. We're going to do it my way. I feel the flare come up and I go, hey, yeah, you have been doing this for a long time. How do you think we should do it? And I actually subordinate. I'm going to listen to what you have to say. That's what I'm going to do. Now, then you'll say, well, I think we should do it like this. And I say, okay, that sounds great. Now, if I have a couple earnest questions, maybe I'll ask you some questions about the plan and why it's the best way to do it. And I hope that you have answers and I can say, okay, great. That sounds like a great plan. Let me go execute this thing. That right there. In order to be able to do that, you who's listening to this right now is like, I can't do that. That's right, because that's your ego talking. That is your ego talking. And if you truly learn to subordinate your ego and you truly learn to adopt humility, you'll be able to do this and your whole life is going to get easier. Everything that you do is going to get easier. So keep that in mind. The apex of humility is from combat, because if you've been to combat, if you've been to true hard combat, it's not an environment that makes you feel arrogant. It actually makes you feel humble because you realize there's things that you can't control. You realize that there's situations that you're not going to be able to handle, and it's a very humbling situation. The rest of life is humbling as well. At least it should be. You should be put in situations where you aren't able to win. You will be in situations where you make bad decisions. You will be in situations where your decision negatively impacts you and the people around you, and you will get humbled by those situations. So life is humbling, but there are people that manage to get through various aspects of life, and they manage to get through those various aspects of life without really running into the situations where they lose. Or when they do lose, they look over at the teammate and say, that was your fault, or that was my fault, or it was the market's fault, or it was the competitor's fault, so it wasn't them. And they were able to maintain that arrogance. They're able to maintain their big ego because everything that happens that's negative is not their fault. When someone is giving you a problem, especially up the chain of command, or you run into this big ego, subordinate your ego.